Today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show, we're going to dive into a bunch of Sly Flourish news. We are starting to get previews and actual reviews of the D&D starter set Heroes of the Borderlands, which is coming out, I think, this week. I'm going to do a spotlight of a different box set, the Dragonbane Boxed Set. I'm also going to talk about the value of solo play, the importance of play, and being a kid again. And we're going to dive into more questions from the Patreon Q&A, all today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show. I'm Mike Shea, your pal from Sly Flourish, here to talk about all things in tabletop role-playing games. Last week on Sly Flourish, I released the article on lazy map annotation. This was sent out over the Sly Flourish newsletter, and it was also published on the Sly Flourish website. You can find a link to it down in the show notes. And I also did a readings and reflections on the Sly Flourish Hero Tier section of the Sly Flourish Patreon. This is where I read every article and then dive deep into the background topics. The stuff I talk about in here is actually one of the Patreon questions today. We're going to dive into this topic even a little bit more. This whole article was about what I consider to be kind of the laziest way to associate a room type to a room and a dungeon map. What's a fast way to do it? What's a way to kind of build yourself towards improvisational play? All kinds of stuff like that. So you can find more about that in this article, Lazy Map Annotation. And we're going to talk about it a little bit later when we dive into the Patreon questions for today. Next week's article is, are published adventures easier to run? No. The answer is no. And I say it right here. No. It's a one-word article. No, not quite. It's a little bit longer than a one-word article. Are published adventures easier to run? No. So why would you do them? That is kind of the topic of next week's Sly Flourish article. If you want to learn more about why you would want to run published adventures, what value they offer to you if they're not easier to run, and why aren't they easier to run, you can take a look at next week's article. It will be up on slyflourish.com, but the best way to get it is to subscribe to the Sly Flourish newsletter. When you subscribe, you can find a link in the show notes. You will get this article delivered to you on Tuesday in your inbox. And I will also be doing a readings and reflections where I will talk about it, but also dive in a little deeper. So that is a fun article on a common topic that's been around for many, many years, which is published versus homebrew adventures. Why do you run one over the other? And why would you run them if they're not easier to run? Last week on the Sly Flourish Patreon, I released the final scenario 15, known as the Vault of the Key of Worlds, for the Key of Worlds scenarios. 15 different scenarios that follow the Key of Worlds arc from the City of Arches source book, which is available in the Sly Flourish bookstore. Key of Worlds, the entire scenario, you can download the whole thing. One zip file has all 15 scenarios, including maps that you can use in VTTs. That's all set there. And now I am beginning to work on some one-shotty kind of places. One location, a lot of times bigger locations like the Tower of Cartan, the Dread Necropolis, some kind of other big locations that are sort of around the City of Arches that tie into some of the other campaign arcs. And then I'm going to be traveling west and working on some new stuff for the regions of the City of Arches that's in the west. So that's awfully fun. But if you are interested in picking up a 15 scenario pack, this is for Hero Tier subscribers of the Sly Flourish Patreon. That was just put out last week. It is on your Hero Tier rewards page where it shows all the different things you get, which is a lot of City of Arches content, and the Readings and Reflections podcast are kind of the main things that the Hero Tier subscribers to the Sly Flourish Patreon get. So that's going to be really fun. I mentioned last week that I'm going to 2 different conventions coming up. The most recent one is coming up in about a month, and this is going to be Gamehole Con in Madison, Wisconsin. Really fun convention. I went there for the first time last year. I really loved it. I ran some Shadowdark games there. I was on some panels there. I got to meet lots of people, see old friends of mine. It was a really fantastic time. So I highly enjoyed it, and I'm going to be on a panel there. Am I the host of the panel? I think I'm the host of the panel for a topic which is the beautiful mess of 5e. This is a topic near and dear to my heart. I love kind of talking about 5e as a platform, and I'm starting to get my head around this idea and what the topic of that panel is going to be. So I'm excited for it. I will probably talk about it here more on the show as well. And what's the main, what is the main thought? What's the main thing that's going on with 5e? And when we think about the beautiful mess of 5e, the beautiful mess of 5e is the fact that there are many different versions of 5e now from several different publishers, not only just core books, but accessory books, adventures, monster books, all kinds of things. And it's messy. it's weird. What do you do with subclasses that kind of work but don't really kind of work? And are you locked in? Does Tales of the Valiant content compatible with D&D 2024? Where does it work? Where does it not work? It's kind of ugly. Oh God, it's ugly. But actually, it's not ugly. It's beautiful because it means we can kind of take from all of these things and bring them together. And I did a video last week where I talked about what my favorite version of 5e was of the kind of 4 main ones that I had been playing, which one I liked the best. But the reality is the best 5e is the one that you can piece together from fun components from all of these different publishers. You get to take the best of the best and build your own 5e for your own group to enjoy it the most. And that's kind of what I want to talk about in this panel that I'm going to be doing at Gamehole Con, the beautiful mess of 5e. Did you know, this is a message for retailers, but it's also a message for customers of your local game shop. So if you have a friendly local game shop that you frequent and you have not seen Sly Flourish Books there, we are friendly. We are retailer friendly. So retailers of game products, specifically friendly local game shops that are selling their products in person, not online. We already have online covered, but we are interested in helping retailers who are selling to actual human beings at actual shops, physical shops. Please email us, support@slyflourish.com, and we would love to partner with you to get we have retail-friendly prices, so you can come to us and we can work to try to bring some Sly Flourish books, including Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, The Lazy DM's Companion, Forge of Foes, and City of Arches to your game shop. We would love to do so. If you work through distributors, we also have our books available through ACD distribution. You can find us. I don't know how it works on the local game shop side, but we have Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, Forge of Foes, and Lazy DM's Companion available through ACD for retail shops that are selling in physical locations. So if you're a retailer and you are looking to sell Sly Flourish products, please reach out to us, support@slyflourish.com. We're happy to work with you. And also, if you frequent a local game shop, maybe talk to the owner of your game shop, talk to the people who handle distribution at your game shop and say, hey, you might really want to pick up some of this awesome Sly Flourish stuff. You can email him at support@slyflourish.com directly, or you can check it out through ACD distribution. So yes, the D&D starter set has come out. Just before I'm recording this video, I just did a 1 hour-ish spotlight of the D&D starter set from my own impressions. So I'm not going to cover those impressions here because there was a whole other video where we're going to talk about the D&D starter set and how cool it is. But lots of other people are talking about it too, and I wanted to spotlight some of that. So my friend Teos Abadia on Alphastream has 2 videos where he talks about the starter set. So down in the show notes, you will find 2 links to 2 videos he did, and his thumbnails are sticky. Convention tested. Here's the Borderlands starter set components and character review. So it's a 30-minute video where he talks about the stuff in there, and then there's a 15-minute one just talking about the adventures. Teos has experience having run the starter set for people at conventions. He's also talked to a lot of people who have run the starter set at conventions. So he has a lot of experience with how this thing has actually played on the battlefield in front of actual people that are both new and experienced game masters that are playing with this. My friend David Christ, who runs Baldwin Games, also has gotten a lot of feedback and shared that feedback that it is very well liked. So if you want to learn more about the D&D, the new D&D Heroes of the Borderlands starter set, watch those 2 videos from Teos. Also, Christian Hoffer over on EN World published the first impressions, an article on the first impressions of the D&D starter set, where he dives into it and has some thoughts. I thought it was a very good review, very interesting to read, and brought up the point that one of the things that's kind of missing from here, which I brought up in my review as well, or my spotlight, I should say, my first impressions video, because there's a lot to kind of dive into here, was that there didn't really have an overarching storyline. The tie-ins are pretty loose, so there isn't really like a set of quests that this goes on, which is something that I noticed too when I was going through it. Not a fatal flaw, but an interesting thing to note that I had not read or heard about from kind of the general marketing of the D&D starter set. Anyway, so lots of things going on with the D&D starter set this week that I think are very interesting. But I'm not going to talk about the D&D starter set today, or the D&D box set. Instead, I'm going to dive into a different box set, that of the game Dragonbane. So this has been, I think, the Dragonbane core box set, which is what I've got here, has been on my bookshelf for a long time. I'd heard a lot about Dragonbane. I've played one Dragonbane game at a local convention, which gave me a taste of what it's like, but it was a very puzzly based adventure. And I didn't feel like I truly understood. Like, I certainly didn't build a character in it. I really didn't understand like what the flow of the game was like. So I wanted to learn more about that. So I cracked open the Dragonbane box set, dug through it. It is an amazing box set, and I'm going to show off a lot of it. I'm going to talk about a lot of what it's got in here. So we're going to do a general spotlight on the Dragonbane box set, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Dragonbane role-playing game is actually like. So Dragonbane is an interesting one. It comes from a Swedish role-playing game that was sort of built from the bones of Dungeons and Dragons because there wasn't a Swedish version of Dungeons and Dragons. So it kind of has its own thing. So it's sort of forked from some of the original D&D and has kind of a different approach to the game. First of all, there are no levels. You don't have levels in your character. You have character, and there's a greater number of character classes. So instead of just having like a smaller number of sort of almost combat-y focused adventure type classes, there's a much wider range of classes. And there's a very heavy focus on skills, a much larger set of skills that you have. The whole system is a D20 roll under. So you have scores associated all throughout it. So if you imagine like the ability scores that you have in a traditional D&D game, they have ability scores like that in Dragonbane. But also all the skills are score-based as well. And you succeed on a score by rolling under that skill. Because it makes sense. The higher the score is, the more likely you are to succeed when you roll under that score. So that's why you're not rolling high, you're rolling low. That took a little bit where you're like, oh, I'm rolling low. A 1 is a critical success, known as a dragon. A 20 is a critical failure, known as a demon. So kind of an interesting mechanic style. One of the things that I really dig about this style is the players know their target number all the time. You don't have to set a target number. The only time that the GM is changing the difficulty on something is by imposing either a boon or a bane, or multiple boons and banes. A boon is essentially like advantage. You know, you roll twice, you take the better result, and the better being the lower result. A bane is the opposite, right? A bane you roll 2d20, and you have to pick the higher one, which is the worst one. But you can have multiple boons and banes. So you could end up, and they cancel each other out. So unlike advantage and disadvantage, you only have one or the other. In this case, a boon, you could have multiple boons and multiple banes, with some of them overtaking the other, some of them canceling each other out. So that's an interesting style. But generally speaking, the player knows the target number they're aiming for. You don't have to figure out what the armor class of a monster is. You roll your sword skill. And if you're successful on your sword skill, you hit. There's no comparison of a stat of the monster compared to the stat of a character. The character already has all of the challenges sitting right there on their sheet, which I think is a really interesting style. The whole roll under, again, kind of takes an interesting, it takes a little bit if you're used to rolling over all the time. There's a bit of a cognitive shift. I really didn't have much of a trouble with it. When I played my little solo version of the game, I didn't really have any trouble with it. But I'm not just talking about the Dragonbane game itself. I really wanted to focus on the Dragonbane box set. So the box set itself goes for $57.75 MSRP off of the Free League publishing website. Free League is the publisher of Dragonbane. I'll tell you, so $58 for this is a really good deal. And here's the number one reason why. This is the whole game. This isn't just a starter set where you only have a subset of the material that you would have to play. The rule book for the game, which is included in here, if you were to buy the rule book separately, is $47 and includes an adventure, but it's the same rule set. Everything is the same. And this isn't the case where this is the whole game, but it's kind of a stripped down version where you don't really have all the stuff. And then there's 2 character accessory books that you have to buy if you really want the other stuff. There aren't separate character books that they're selling separately. All of the character stuff is in here. It's all the same stuff. The only 2 expansions that they have for it right now is a bestiary, which has many more monsters, and a campaign book called Path of Glory. Those are the only other 2 books that are available for Dragonbane. They just had a Kickstarter recently. I did a spotlight of the Kickstarter for a new book of magic and a new city source book that they're building for it. But I'm actually impressed that they have stayed away from the idea of increasing a lot of the character stuff that they've been building, because then it's kind of like, well, yeah, the Dragonbane core set includes all the rules, but not really, because you'd have to buy like a Xanathar or a Tasha style guide that has the stuff that you really want. That isn't the case here. All the character information is inside the book. Here is a shot of all of the material that exists inside this box, and it is a lot of stuff. You've got decks of cards for things like magic items, initiative, quests, and other kinds of things. They have stand-up tokens, including the little clips that you stick your stand-up token into. Not a ton of them. So, one of the reasons they actually do sell like a monster vault set of more of these standees if you want them, but there's enough of them in there that you could certainly use it. It includes the whole Dragonbane core rulebook, which I think is like a 130-page rulebook, a big adventure book that is also like, I think it's 96 pages, like a big adventure book that includes essentially like a whole campaign. There is a quick start guide that kind of gets you started. There's a bunch of pre-generated characters, I think 5 different pre-generated characters ready to play, and then 5 character sheets that are ready for you to build characters with. So it includes all the materials you need to build characters, but also includes some pre-gens if you want to get started. And then one of the things I'm going to talk about specifically is the Alone in Deepfell Reach solo rules. So it has a set of solo rules so that you can try out Dragonbane by yourself, get a handle on the rules, get an idea of how the game works, and try everything out on your own before you start playing with a group. It also includes a full set of dice and a beautiful map. There's the whole map of the region, and the region and many of the spaces in the region tie to the locations that you'll find in the Adventures book. The adventure campaign is essentially, I like to refer to them as a yam-shaped adventure, right? Where it starts off with like one scenario that gets you started and then very quickly expands out to lots of different things that you can do in lots of different ways, no one path that you have to take, and then kind of culminates in a finale. I really like that adventure style. I think that works really well. And it looks like it's got a ton of material just in this one box, just in this one $57 box set for you to run a decent sized campaign. Now, I mentioned that that there are no character levels in this, which means that kind of you can sort of face every challenge, but obviously some challenges are going to be significantly more difficult. If you're fighting a dragon or a demon right off the bat, you're probably not going to do so well. So the way that you have progression in Dragonbane is a couple of different ways. Skill progression, in which your skills actually get better. You get better at doing the things that you're doing. Heroic abilities are what they call them. Heroic abilities are kind of like feats. They're sort of like if you took class powers and feats. That's what you get with a heroic ability. You generally start with 1. Sometimes you might start with 2. Mages start with 0 because they already have the spellcasting one. And you earn these every time you make like a significant accomplishment according to the GM. So anytime you'd hit a major milestone, you're going to get a new heroic ability. You also get a heroic ability anytime you take your scores up to 18. You can also increase scores. The way you increase scores is kind of interesting because it's almost all player driven. Anytime you roll a dragon or a demon with a particular skill, you mark that skill and say, okay, that skill is due for a potential upgrade. Then at the end of the game, the GM will ask you a series of questions about how you did in this. Did you participate in the game session? Did you explore a new location? Did you defeat one or more dangerous adversaries? Did you overcome an obstacle without using force? And did you give into your weakness? Your weakness is kind of like a flaw that your character might have. And did you sort of role play that flaw? Could be one of those. For each one of those questions that you answer yes, you mark another skill that you haven't previously marked. So even if you don't roll any demons or dragons, you're probably going to add about 4 of these on the assumption you did an adventure the typical adventure way. You can sort of mark 4 of your skills. Once you've marked them, after you've done that, then you roll a d20. Only this time you're trying to get above the score. And if you roll above the score increases by 1. The interesting thing is that means that you're not always going to be increasing the score. Some of those you'll be increasing faster than others, particularly if they're low. The lower the score is, the more likely you are to increase it. The higher the skill gets, the harder it is to increase it. And it can only be increased to a maximum of 18. Now, once you hit 18, that means you now get a new heroic ability as well. But getting to an 18 is hard because, think about it. If you're at a 17 and that's the one you marked, you have to roll an 18, 19, or 20 on a d20 in order for that one to go up. So it could actually take you some amount of time, some number of game sessions. But you're doing this pretty much every session, which means there's some fun character progression opportunity that exists almost purely on the player side with every session that you're playing in the game. But then, of course, when you get new heroic abilities, the GM basically determines when you get it. After a grand heroic deed, the GM or the adventurer can award you with a heroic ability. This should be a rare event, never more than once per standard length adventure. So you could do it if you wanted to increase your progression. You could do it basically with each major quest completed, with each major adventure that you've done, 2 or 3 sessions, then everybody gets a new one. I think that that's probably how I would do it. I wouldn't hang on to this too tightly that it's a rare event, because then you might we're going to do it 5 times a year. I would probably do it. I mean, again, I haven't played it fully, so I don't know for sure, but I don't know that it would be out of hand to give people a little bit more progression. And then progression can take things up. But for example, you do not increase your hit points unless you take the heroic ability that lets you increase hit points. So like the robust heroic ability gives you 2 hit points. So hit points are very, very flat, right? That's one of the things to keep in mind is hit points are very, very flat in Dragonbane. And you can increase it, but you're only going to increase it by 2 for every instance of this particular heroic thing that you pick up, heroic ability that you pick up, and you're giving up every other potential heroic ability that you could pick up at the same time. So character progression is much leaner, much flatter than you would expect from like the big level jumps that you're getting with something like a traditional D&D game. So one of the things that we often deal with when we're talking about different RPGs like this is how do we sell it to our players? How do we get our players interested in wanting to try out other game systems from ones they might be familiar with, very typically Dungeons & Dragons? I have good news that I can give you 2 words, only 2 words that you need to say to get your players on board and to immediately raise an eyebrow and go, really? I'm interested. And those 2 words are duck people. You get to be a duck person. Do you want to be a duck person? Everybody wants to be a duck people. And all you have to do is show this picture of the duck rogue assassin dropping down and they're like, ooh, I'm in, right? So yeah, pretty interesting set. They call them kin, right? And there's a set of different kin that exist in Dragonbane: human, halfling, dwarf, elf, mallard, and wolfkin. So obviously mallard and wolfkin are kind of the two interesting kin. I would not be surprised, and you should be prepared for having an entire party full of duck people if you open them up, particularly if you use those 2 words to sell them on the game. The other way that I would say to sell them on the game, there's a couple ones. If you can get the art in front of them, the art in this game is amazing. The art is really cool, has a very particular style, and just looks fantastic. And this is something that I think kind of sets it apart from what I would refer to as sort of other old school style games. And I would say this is definitely an old school style game, is that the art, the evocative art, really is kind of, I think, a step up from a lot of the traditional kind of black and white art that you'd see in typical old school style games. It gives it a different feel, even though it is kind of an old school game that the dangers abound, a lot of challenging the player, not the characters. They're probably, characters are probably going to die. And so you're probably going to swap characters more than once. So, that style is still here. But I think the art really kind of separates it from the style. Look at that. Look at the duck guy, duck paladin, right? Who doesn't want to be a duck paladin? So, and there's a wolfkin. I think you might get some people that are pretty eager to have a wolfkin. Instead of classes, they have professions. Professions are artisan, bard, fighter, hunter, knight, mage, mariner, merchant, scholar, and thief. I ended up rolling a character up completely by random. By the way, character creation, super fast to roll up characters in this game. Really quick to do it. And fun to build a character out, but very easy to do just with pen and just pencil and paper. And I picked a scholar, and I'll tell you, a scholar going into a dungeon by themselves for the solo game was kind of interesting. I might switch out and pick one of the more robust. Either that or my scholar is going to I'm going to give my scholar a heroic ability and give them some magic, because they can probably do it. Hey, there's a duck scholar. Who doesn't want to be a duck scholar? So I mentioned that it has an entire kind of almost like a campaign adventure book inside of it. It's a 120-page adventure book, but very open-ended in what direction the characters are going, what direction that they are taking. It has sort of an opening scene and situation. It has a town called the Outskirt where you can go. It has descriptions of various journeys. Journeying is kind of its own set of mechanics inside Dragonbane. How you go about journeys, what roles you take, what you're able to do, how you keep watch, how you set camp. All of those things are pretty heavily defined in a journeys section of the game. And then you have all of these different adventures that you can go on. The Ritter Mound, Bothlid's Lode, the Temple of the Purple Flame, Tower of Sighs, Oracle Cave, Troll's Spire, Deadeye's Cave, Fort Malice, the Village of Day Before, Road's End Inn, and the Isle of Mist. So lots of different various sections of this adventure guide. But, 120-page adventure book, again, that you're getting in a box set, along with the full rules of the game, really makes this box set feel full. Like you get a lot of stuff in here that I would say you don't typically get. You typically don't get with any kind of box set. Whole lot of adventures. Again, beautiful maps. Right, beautiful map, and with an intention that you kind of put the map in front of the players, and they sort of decide where they're going to go and what they're going to examine. But do you have quests? So one thing that this one has is quest cards, and you can drop quest cards out there. You could probably do different ways. Each quest card can take the characters to one of the locations that's going on here and sort of set them on their way. So I think it is very cool. Again, really, just love the art. The art style of this is loads of fun. The box set actually does include like a 2-page open spread mini battle mat. It's just paper, so it's not a dry erase thing that you can draw on, but it's a way to kind of drop it in there and use those little tokens, use the little standees to kind of mimic a battle. I thought that was pretty cool. It has a wilderness one, it has a dungeon one, mainly to handle character positioning. Very lightweight, nothing super fancy, but I thought it was a neat addition to the stuff that was included inside the box set. So one of the neat things, the physical book doesn't have this, but the PDF, which you get included, note, a full PDF of all of the materials, and all the materials in here comes in the PDFs when you pick it up off of their shop, which is an advantage of picking up the Dragonbane set off of their website rather than going to something like Amazon. You're not going to get the PDF version with Amazon. But one of the neat things it has, for example, are all of the player maps in a PDF. So you can drop these into you probably like screenshot these and drop them into your virtual tabletop of choice, or export them somehow so that you have maps available to use with your players. Or with the PDFs, you could kind of print them out and use them at your game. So it looks like it's got maps for all of the major adventure locations. Yeah, here's the Isles of Mist, the Labyrinth. So, and again, really, really neat style with that. Here are an example of the standees that they have. The same artwork that they have in the book, so they look really cool. My only complaint is there's not a lot of them. So you're going to want to substitute some guys for some other guys because, sometimes you might be facing more creatures than you typically would. So, but I didn't have trouble kind of finding interesting standees to fit in for everything that's there. So one thing that's interesting is monsters. There's not a ton of monsters there's not a ton of monsters that are inside the core book. It's a pretty small number, but they do have rules for building NPCs. And it's interesting because monsters and NPCs are handled differently. NPCs kind of act like characters act. They roll on a check in order to do a thing. And you'll see an example with like a skeleton. If we go, or like here's the goblin, right? And it says specifically, they say the goblin is non-monster. Goblins do not count as monsters in combat, but as ordinary NPCs. And that's because they kind of act like an NPC would act. And you have scouts and warriors. If you're rolling an attack, you'd say long spear, skill level 12. So you have to roll 12 or under. And then they do damage. They do 2d8 damage. That's a warrior goblin. Looks like it's actually pretty tough. But then other monsters like the griffin operate differently. Griffins, when they take their initiative, and sometimes they have this thing called Ferocity 2. That means they act twice in a round. That means when you're pulling initiative cards, they use cards to do initiative in this. They pull 2, which means they act twice. Then when it's their turn to act, the GM is free to either pick from one of these options or roll a d6, which I think is really interesting, on what kind of attack they might do. So if a griffin goes and it makes an attack, you might roll a 3, sweeping claws. The griffin sweeps its claws in a foreleg and a wide arc, attacking all player characters within 2 meters. Each victim suffers d8 slashing damage as knocked down. Or high drop. The griffin grabs a player character in its claws and takes to the sky. Unless the victim dodges the attack, the griffin grabs them and flies 2d6 plus 6 meters into the air. On the next turn, the griffin drops the victim instead of a new monster attack, who takes damage from the fall. Right? So different kinds of monster attacks that you roll on in order to see what they're going to do. Now, a GM is free, of course, to choose one if you think it might be more fun or the circumstances are different. But this idea of sort of a monster with artificial intelligence built into it, a monster that kind of acts on its own based on a roll, is really kind of an interesting way to have the characters or have the monsters behave. So I thought that was very interesting. There are no kind of set difficulties of monsters. Monsters are kind of there to be, that you'll have a particular monster based on the story that's going on. And that again is because of the relatively flat math. That said, you have things like the Manticore, who has 44 hit points. That's a lot of hit points. Now remember, characters are doing damage to them every time they succeed on their own roll. There's no armor class. The character tries to do damage by rolling their own check. This is similar to the way Shadowdark does its spellcasting, right? Is that you have to roll a check on your own, independently of anything going on with the monster. But if you succeed, you succeed. It definitely happens. So really, the only thing that's kind of determining how dangerous a monster is kind of the hit points and maybe the severity of the attacks that it does. But other than that, there's not really an indicator that one monster is like significantly more dangerous than another. If we look at a dragon, you could assume a dragon is really powerful. And again, 84 hit points certainly seems that way. Ferocity 3 means it gets to act 3 times in a battle. That gives you an idea of like, how many characters does this thing sort of act like? If it's Ferocity 2, that means it kind of is the equivalent of 2 characters. 3 is sort of the equivalent of 3. There's no encounter building rules, though. There's nothing to tell you that this is kind of how they work. Demons, not quite as hard as dragons, but still pretty tough. 64 hit points and lots of things they can do. Pretty dangerous stuff. So the monster, how monsters operate, I think is a really interesting style to this game. So one of the things I think is really interesting, this is pretty unique among role-playing game products, is it includes a 12-page solo dungeon delving campaign for Dragonbane. That means you and you alone can buy this box set and enjoy it. Build characters, go on adventures, and enjoy things. And we're actually going to dive into this as a larger topic, a GM tip, but I want to talk about it specifically for how it works in Daggerheart because I think it's really cool. There's lots of different ways to do sort of solo games. Sometimes they're more like choose your own adventure games where you will see a series of prompts that kind of describe a situation. You either make a choice or you make a roll, and that sort of leads to the next situation. I've seen those before. But then there's another way, which is the way that games like Ironsworn run solo rules, and where the solo rules for Shadowdark, known as Solodark, do it the same way. It's pretty common, which is the idea of sort of Oracle, I'm going to call Oracle dice. And the idea with Oracle dice is you're not really set in specific situations that you then navigate. You're creating the situations from prompts and from dice rolls that add words and add ideas and add themes to what's going on. And the solo rules for Dragonbane follow this approach. It talks about how to make a character. It actually gives a free heroic ability, Armor of 1, where you get 2 initiatives and you get to go twice, and Soul Survivor, where whenever you're adventuring alone, you may push a roll without suffering a condition so that you can get advantage on them. Let's see. And it looks like you can pick both of these. What's funny is I know that I used the Army of 1, but I don't think I used Soul Survivor. So kind of interesting stuff. But then it talks about, the fortune chart, right? And the fortune chart is when you get to this idea of Oracle dice, that if you have yes, no questions, you can roll a d6. 1 is an extreme no, then a yes, and then an extreme yes. If there are numbers of things, you might have none or one, few, several, and numerous. Scale, small, moderate, large, and immense. Power, weak, minor, formidable, and incredible. Quality, flawed, mundane, fine, and precious. Reaction, hostile, wary, open, or friendly. So there's ideas, this is that sort of Oracle roll. They call it the fortune chart, but you can roll on this and it's like a magic 8-ball, right? It's kind of giving you ideas. And that's what's really interesting is the story that's really happening is being built in your head while you go, which is really kind of interesting. You have the inspiration table, which also has lots of different things, attributes like ancient, arcane, blocked, dangerous. Actions like avenge, control, find. It's almost like a motivation. Things, barriers, captivity, death, group. And then there's 20 of these, right? Actions, attributes, and things are G20 ones that you can roll on. Dragon and demon effects. What happens when you roll a demon and when you roll a dragon? There's an NPC template for minions and bosses that have a set amount of stuff that they do, relevant skills, the amount of damage that they inflict, the hit points that they have, and things like that. So if you want to just quickly have an NPC, this is like your miniature Forge of Foes table. I really dig it because if you think about it, you don't really have to have scaling increases in monsters because the things don't increase as much. So if you have like a normal dude or like a minion, you have the stats for a minion. If you have a boss, you have the stats for a boss, and that's what they are. You don't really need anything else. It all fits in this little table. So I really kind of dig that. NPC attack tables are, if you are rolling attacks, you can roll these things to kind of see what they do. This sort of makes them more like a monster. You can use the treasure deck in order to determine what kind of treasure you pick up, reveal the valuables that you pick up. What do you do when you resolve failures? How do you make sure that things keep going forward? There's a general damage. Like at one point, my character went face first through a series of traps and just sucked trying to get through all these traps and got hit by a bunch of fire traps on their way in. How to make, as a stalwart solo adventurer, you may make a healing roll to tend your wounds. So again, some more different rules for how you handle healing with him. And then you actually have the scenario itself. The scenario is that there is like a chapel, and there's a powerful wolfkin named Inglofer Stonegaze, who kind of sends you on missions. So Inglofer gives you a series of missions that you go on. You then go into them, you navigate waypoints. Some of these waypoints you're going to build out as you go. There's a goal for what you're there for. You kind of accomplish the goal. And then you can come back, you can leave and kind of come back. You can gain experience as you go. And then you even have some rules for generating your own custom missions. Exploration tables, again, more tables that you can roll on for things like details of locations, inhabitants, various areas. So tons of random tables. This is really good with your, to build lots of wild stuff. You can roll a lot on these random tables. Heavily based on random tables. Scavenging, what you find with scavenging. Search, what do you find when you're doing a search? Right? And this is kind of neat. A concealed foe, a trap, a secret path, hidden antechamber, hidden treasure, or hidden vault, right? Different kinds of traps that you might run into. And then here's the mission summaries, right? And I think you can kind of drop these in different order. There's the captive orc. This is the one that I went through. And you can see the scenario is really short, right? It's basically like 5 scenes. And you think about your 5 scenes that we were talking about previously, right? Number 1 is like here's what the scenario is. And here's an example. The leader of a sect of demon cultists holds the Worldbreaker Shard, a tip of the abyssal spear that split this land and created the breach. This power cannot stay in their grasp. Foul magics cloud the location from my sight. So you must locate the shard through other means. Seek below a band of cultists transporting a prisoner, an orc named Gorum. Gorum knows the location of the cultist outpost and may serve as a valuable ally in days to come. So that's your intro. So you also have a threat. A threat is like a countdown timer. At a certain point, depending on how things go and if things get delayed, you can have a timer. I used a little D6 and I would just rotate the D6 from 6 down to 1. After 1, the thing would happen. And in this case, the threat is a trio of goblin scouts plan to plunder the breach, looting ancient crypts and robbing any who wander in their path. So when they trigger, these 3 goblins, or the 3 goblins will attack, right? That could be fun. So the first one of the 5 scenes is the plunging path. A sloping corridor carries you into the oppressive depths of the breach. Tread softly lest ye wake the creatures of fang and wing nested within the cracks and hollows of this ancient passage. So for that one, what I improvised was, there is a harpy. And I have to deal with the harpy. And in this case, I convinced the harpy to let me go. I was playing a sage and I wasn't particularly robust. And I said, hey, harpy, how about I give you, I made like a persuasion check and I succeeded, but I had to give something up. So I gave it my bed furs. Right? So here are my bed furs. And it took my bed furs and then let me go. The charred tomb. Fire long ago ravaged this once grand mausoleum. It holds 5 remaining sarcophagi amid piles of ash. Find ye a path through a door hidden within one of these coffins, but disturb not the scorched dead nor the hidden trap. So in this case, I kind of rolled on each one to say like, I'm going to pick one. And I think what I did is I they don't tell you exactly what to do. So I was like, I'm going to roll kind of like the equivalent of like a search check. And if I succeed on the search check, I'm going to have my, then it will tell me what's in there before I open it up. And then I would roll to see like what's in there. Is it a trap? Is it the door? Is it something else? And then that way I could kind of figure it out. And I kind of sucked at it. And I ended up fighting, I think, 2 skeletons. I didn't deal with a trap, but I did have to fight 2 skeletons. As I would open them up, skeletons would burst first, and I fought the skeletons. Then there's 3 and 4 are 2 unknown chambers. And in this case, I kind of rolled on the tables above to come up with some chambers. One of them was filled with like fiery traps. I forget what the other one was. And then I got to the fiendish altar. And here there were some cultists. I had 2 cultists. I used 3 cultists that were here. And they ended up kicking my ass. And they knocked me out and they put me on the altar. And then they were going to sacrifice me. They already had the orc that they were going to summon. They were going to sacrifice the orc. They decided to sacrifice me instead. They threw the orc prisoner away. They put me on the altar and they were going to sacrifice me to summon a demon. They summoned the demon and I looked over at the demon and I used my knowledge and lore to use the demon's true name. And I succeeded on that. And they went, oh, you know who I am? And I'm like, I do know who you are. And I said, and if you'll kill these jackasses, I'll support you. I'll be on your side. And the demon's like, I don't know. And I rolled a persuasion and I think I rolled a dragon on the persuasion. I rolled really well. And the demon's like, okay. And the demon murdered the cultists and then flooded into me. So now my character is possessed by a demon. And I had this little interaction in my head with Gorums, who I rescued. I'm like, hey, I rescued him. And he's like, what did you do? And I'm like, I saved our lives. And he's like, you gave up your soul, right? So now my character is possessed by a demon. I thought that was really cool. And the fun bit is all in my head, right? It was just me rolling dice at the table, all in my head. We're going to talk about that. So that was very cool. I want to play it again. There's a handful of these scenarios. There are 5 total scenarios that you can play in this, but of course there's scenario generators, so you can kind of make your own. So you can really build your own kind of fun solo RPG using the material in Dragonbane to do so. I thought that was really cool, and I think it's a really neat addition to the box. So I think the Dragonbane Boxed Set is fantastic. I really, really like it. I think it is another box set that is a tremendous value for the money that you pay. The system looks really cool. I really want to try it out. I really want to play it. I want to play it with like a longer campaign. I think it could be very fun. I think it nails that kind of old school style with its own sort of interesting mechanics, some fun character progression that I think is meaningful to players. The art is really, really cool. The material that comes in the box is excellent. So I am a huge fan and I highly recommend it. So check out the Dragonbane Core Box Set. You can find a link down in the show notes. In our adult lives, it's really rare for us to be in situations where we get to let our imaginations run wild. We get to do this when we're kids, right? Nobody thinks about it when kids just grab their imagination and make up stories and go out with their friends and play through these stories and be parts of that. Role-playing in children happens all of the time. Those of us who love role-playing games know that you can kind of capture that throughout your entire life. And there's people who talk about this. They talk about the importance of being kids again, right? The importance of being childlike. But we just have rare circumstances where we're able to do so. Now, when we're playing role-playing games with our friends, we definitely get to tap into that. We get to think about our characters. We get to think about what our characters are going to do. We as GMs get to kind of pave the path in front of the characters as they're going forward, and that's really fun. But one area where we really get to watch this explode, where we really get to see the creativity explode, is when we're playing solo RPGs. I was just talking about the Dragonbane Boxed Set and the fact that it has an entire set of solo rules for playing Dragonbane in it, but it is certainly not the only solo RPG. Some of the other ones that I've tried are Solodark, the rules for playing Shadowdark solo. Ironsworn, I've played a couple of campaigns through of Ironsworn. There's Ironsworn and Ironsworn Starforge. That's really where I got to see the value of playing a solo RPG. And some journaling games like 1,000-Year-Old Vampire was another one that I really enjoyed. And I think when you're playing a solo RPG, that's when you really get to watch your imagination go bananas, because nobody is there. It's just you, it's some story prompts, maybe it's some dice, and it's some ideas, and you're just letting the story flow out of you while you're rolling these dice. What does it mean? What are some of the directions we go? And you can watch this kind of thing take place, and it's really a magical experience. Like having done it with Dragonbane and gone through the scenario that I went through with Dragonbane, which only took me about an hour. I think it was an hour including character creation. Was a really fun experience of getting to build out an entire story with character and how the character interacted with the world and came up with this story just by rolling dice. And it's just not something we really get to do very often, because sometimes it feels silly, right? Like if we were to tell people this thing, they'd be like, what, that was you sitting at a table with dice? What does that even mean? And you're like, no, I had this whole story of my character. No one's going to care, but you care. And that's all that matters, right? You get to enjoy the story that you're building. But also solo RPGs do something else for game masters, which is I think that they may be one of the best forms of cross-training that GMs can do to build up our skills for improvisational play at the table. So there aren't a lot of transferable skills that we can bring into GMing other than just running games, right? When we're talking about being better game masters, we can listen to advice, we can watch other games, and we get a lot of stuff from that. We can read books, we can fill our minds with fiction, we can go for long walks and think about what's going to happen in our game. We can change our prep, we can do all that stuff. But one of the parts that's really tough is that sort of thinking on your feet for improvisational gameplay. When we run solo games, it's all 100% improvisational gameplay. We're watching the games form while we're playing them, because part of being a solo RPG person is you have to roll dice and sort of build things from the prompts that you have. So what I found almost immediately on playing games like Ironsworn was my own ability to improvise things during the games I was running for my players, for my friends, got better the minute I started to think about the open-ended nature of solo role-playing games. So if you take nothing else from this, try a solo RPG, and there are free ones out there. Ironsworn is free, but I definitely would consider picking up the Dragonbane core set just for the solo rules, along with everything else that it's got. There's lots of stuff. The Solodark rules for Shadowdark are also free, and you can get the quick start guides for Shadowdark for free. I'll link to all this in the show notes. Lots of fantastic resources for running solo RPGs, and a great way to just enjoy the hobby on your own. Gets you away from the rectangle of pain that we all carry around, right? Gets you away from carrying one of these and sitting and seeing what's going on in the social medias. No one cares. Doesn't matter. How about instead sit down at a table with a pencil and paper and play yourself a solo RPG? Really, really fun. Life has a tendency of breaking down our drive for creativity. We're focused on jobs. We're focused on outcomes. We've got goals. We've got money. We've got politics. We've got all these things that are going on. And yet we have this incredible ability to imagine things. It's something I don't think any other animal really has that we know of, is the ability to imagine virtual realms and virtual worlds, right? And we use this for all aspects of our life. But here's one where we can use it and just let it run free, and we know exactly what it's there for, and we know exactly where it's going. Video games don't give us this. Books don't give us this. Watching movies doesn't give us this. We definitely see it when we're with our players around the table and we're playing. And the benefit that we get when we're sitting with our players is the social connection of being with other people is so critical to our lives. That matters a lot too. But it still may hold us back a little bit when it comes to the creativity that we might have if we're just on our own running solo games. It really gives us that opportunity to kind of lose ourselves in the games that we play. So I really cannot overstress how wild and fun and creative and beneficial running solo RPGs can be, both to help us stretch our improvisational muscles so that we'll be better GMs when we're running things at our table, but also just the pure fun of letting ourselves be kids again and letting our imaginations run wild and tell ourselves stories that never would have existed if we didn't do it. Every quarter on the Sly Flourish Patreon, we have the Sly Flourish Patreon Q&A. Every month, patrons can ask any RPG-related question, and every Friday, I answer all of the questions that have come up. And some of those questions I bring here to the show so we can dive into the topic a little deeper. Lumby says, how do you go about preparing for a session when the party is at a fork in the road? My next game is picking up in the center of a large dungeon. The players can choose to go anywhere. I prepped with the 8 steps to flesh out some areas and encounters in the direction I'm guessing they'll go, but I can't help think that they'll turn right when I prep them to turn left, leaving me to improv the session. Yes, leaving it improv the session gives me the impression that you think that is the failure state, when improving the session might be the very thing you want to aim for. So I talked earlier in the Lazy RPG Talk Show about lazy map annotations. So I'm going to offer a few things here. You specifically talked about dungeons, so I'm going to talk about dungeons. But in it, I talked about lazy map annotations. And in the original Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, in the 8 steps for fantastic locations, I brought up the model of have an evocative name for a location and then have 3 aspects for that location. 3 interesting things that the players can recognize, the characters can recognize, or maybe do something with that kind of fill it out. But if you had to fill out 20 or 30 rooms of a dungeon with an evocative name and 3 aspects, that's a lot of stuff to come up with. That's a lot of prep that you would have to do. So instead, I said, all you really have to do is just come up with an interesting name that's enough for you to be able to improvise the other features when you need them. So if you don't know what direction that they're going, you could just jot down the name of a location. Recently, in my Lazy Map Annotations article, and I've had discussions here as well, I went a step further to say you might not even need to associate all of the potential types of locations to all of the rooms in the dungeon. Instead, you might just have a list of potential chambers. And then when the players are going from one room to the next, you can drop that potential chamber in where it makes sense. I don't think I would do this for important chambers. I think that probably you have certain chambers where absolutely they are just one specific thing. that they are not a chamber that you can just move the features around on. But maybe half of them could be, right? Maybe half of the chambers, particularly chambers on the map that aren't really that important, those you could probably just have a list of potential chambers. Now, on the Lazy GM resource document available on slyflourish.com, I have a list of 20 chamber types for 15 different kinds of locations. You'll find a link to this down in the show notes. And that you can use as inspiration to give you ideas for the kinds of chambers that might exist for your dungeon. So then when you've built this out, if you don't know what direction they're going in a dungeon, what you have are a list of potential inhabitants like monsters and NPCs, potential treasure they might pick up, secrets and clues which you can drop anywhere, and a bunch of potential locations that might fill in those spots on the map. Now, again, if there are some people who really hate the idea of literally dropping in what the contents of a room are, what the purpose of a room is during play. I don't really think it matters that much. But if it bothers you, you can set them all out ahead of time. I don't really need to set them all out ahead of time. There's a lot of times where I'm like, it doesn't really matter that much. I might change a room. And what I've noticed is when I'm running the game, even if I set it one way, I might change it to another because I think it better fits the story, the direction, or my own kind of view of the location sort of changes, or I think it just might be more fun. So in this case, with the 8 steps, we are not planning out individual scenes and encounters that have everything pre-built. Instead, what we're doing is putting out all of the components and preparing the components that we need for our specific game so we can bring these components together to cook up a room at the moment. And that's that idea of improvising the session. You don't need to do it for everything. There are definitely times where you're going to know what's in there. You're going to know who's in there, what monsters are in there, what kind of things they're going to learn, what sort of features the room are going to have. There's lots of times where you know all that stuff and you're going to write that stuff down. But there are other times where you're filling out 20 or 30 rooms of a map and you don't know what's there. Well, guess what? You don't need to necessarily figure it out now. You could figure it out then because they're not going to go to 20 or 30 rooms. They're going to go to like 4 or 5 rooms. And now instead of planning out 20 rooms where 15 of them you throw away, maybe you only have 10 descriptions, general room descriptions of the kinds of things that would be here. And you pick those and use those to improvise the chamber when they get there. You improvise the chamber. You choose what kind of monsters make sense. Maybe there's an NPC there. Maybe there's a situation you didn't think of. Maybe there's some treasure there. Maybe there's some secrets and clues they learn there. Lots of things they can drop in, but you can do that while you're running the game. Some people think that's quantum ogering. I don't think it's quantum ogering. I think it's no different than if you're doing your prep during the game instead of doing it before the game. There's really not much of a difference as far as I'm concerned. It's still your imagination that's that's building things out. The only time it becomes real is when your players see it. Once your players see something, now it's real. Now it's become focused. Before that, it's all fuzzy gray stuff, and you can bring it together as you're running your game. Bryden M says, I came across a bit of a problem today. The party is exploring the ruined temple of a lost magocracy, as one does, and found some treasure. But they didn't want to take it because it seemed culturally significant to these people and felt disrespectful to take it. From a real-world perspective, they're probably not wrong, but it seemed like exploring temples and tombs and coming out with treasure is a pretty big part of D&D. From an anti-colonialist perspective, are there appropriate ways to address this issue while still keeping the dungeons in our Dungeons & Dragons? Yes. So this is a really interesting topic, which is one of the reasons I brought it to this show. This is something that I actually address in City of Arches. In the book City of Arches, we have a thing called the Magistrate of Tombs. And the idea here is that you have a current government in the City of Arches, but they know that there's all kinds of different civilizations that have existed all around the area. And being a good society, being a good group, they have a magistrate that says there are only very specific circumstances where you can go and loot these tombs. But there are circumstances where you can loot these tombs. So in City of Arches, I had this group called the Magistrate of Tombs, and you had to, it was also sort of like tongue-in-cheek, right? It was meant to be sort of a bureaucracy that you had to deal with, and you're like, really, I can't just go into a tomb and take a sword? It's like, no, there's rules, right? And some of it was tongue-in-cheek on the idea that you had to deal with the Magistrate of Tombs when you're going to do some of this, but some of it was also to kind of put these ideas in there that like, hey, we don't just go into tombs and take anything we want, because otherwise a lot of times it'd be boring because all the tombs had already been raided and all the stuff had already been taken. So the Magistrate of Tombs says there are only certain authorizations where you can raid a tomb. And these include authorization, that you are legally recognized ancestry to the group that was there. So therefore that stuff really does belong to you. So you could go get it. Or you're working on behalf of somebody who has that ancestry who says, hey, yes, this is our stuff. This is my stuff. I am part of this group. Therefore we have it and I need you to go get it. So you can see quests where they're like, hey, my great-great-grandfather had an old sword. We would like to have the sword brought back in our possession. It's now in a tomb that's filled with skeletons. Can you go down there and get it? Preservation, knowing that the stuff is going to be destroyed otherwise. It's either going to be destroyed or it's going to be looted. It's not going to stick around. You could get authorization to go get that thing if literally it's going to be gone if you don't. So, and in this case, in the Cliffs of the Dead, the cliffs literally get destroyed. The tombs in the Cliffs of the Dead eventually get destroyed. So it's your job. One of the jobs could be to go in and get them before they're being destroyed. A direct threat, that sometimes there are specific threats in these places that are so dangerous that they need somebody to go down there and deal with them, which could include dealing with artifacts or going and collecting things because they put the city at risk. Think of like nuclear material that's leaking out, right? It's like, well, we don't want to go and, hurt the culture. It's like, yeah, we're all going to die if we don't do this, right? So that's another one. One of my favorite ones is direct permission. The spirits of the dead can come to you and say, because you are serving the Knights of the Black Flame, I bequeath to you the sword of Eryxitheus, one of the original swords of the Black Flame. The only deal is you're not allowed to go to the Magistrate of Tombs and go like, oh no, a ghost told us it was totally okay. You actually have to bring proof from the ghost or bring the ghost. And I think I had it in circumstances where it's like, yeah, you can't just bring any ghost. We need to know that this particular ghost is actually the ghost who has the permission. So there's lots of ghosts out there and you can't just bring a ghost and be like, oh yeah, totally, it's fine. He should totally take that sword when that ghost had nothing to do with the sword. So instead they have to have a priest who can also say, yes, this ghost is actually the ghost who's responsible for this. The ghost says it can have it, then they can have it. I thought that was kind of funny, right? That one kind of amused me. Interception. Other Tomb Raiders could be getting it. You need to go get it first. That could be one of the other reasons that you can do it. Now, one of the things that I made clear though is like, you don't have to follow this. So first of all, anytime you have a conversation like this, there's a bunch of people out there who freak out and they're like, oh my God, you're ruining D&D. How dare you? You're bringing all this stuff. I'm not touching your game, man. You can do whatever you want. If you don't care, you don't care. If you and your party doesn't care, you don't care. You don't have to put any of this stuff in there. So that totally, however you want to deal with it is totally fine. But one of the other things is like, and in the City of Arches book, I say, also, you can just not follow the rules. Right? You can go raid tombs, right? It's illegal according to the law of the society that you're in, but it happens. And there's even groups here like Adele Rosethorn of Adele's Curios who works with the Black Hand. They're doing it, right? So like it happens, right? And everyone kind of knows it happens, but it is illegal. It is not intended to be there. And I think this gets into another question about like when we're talking, and I am not an expert in colonialization. I'm not an expert in the larger kind of discussions of cultural appropriation and all sorts of things like this. I have no background in it at all. So I'm going to say probably ignorant things around it. But one of the things is 4 adventurers going into a tomb isn't colonialization. Colonialization, from my understanding, is when an entire government or an entire society or an entire kingdom moves in and washes away or appropriates or destroys or loots an entire other civilization, right? Like a weaker civilization that wasn't able to kind of fend off that group. 4 adventurers aren't the British Empire, right? So there are circumstances, and like this came in my Dragon Empire game. They went down into a tomb. They found the tomb of a wizard, a goblin wizard. The goblin wizard's tomb was there and had a wand. And I think somebody said, I respectfully take the wand from the tomb. And I was like, wait a minute, this is like a nice tomb of this nice woman, and we're taking the thing. And it's like, yeah, you guys are also the lowest of the bottom of the totem pole of the politics of the Dragon Empire. You aren't the Dragon Empire. And by the way, if the Dragon Empire came here, they'd totally take it. And they might take it if you don't. So it was like, you are struggling, right? You're the ones that are trying to fight off against the empire that has not only, like one of the things I think is on the opposite side, the Dragon Empire in my Dragon Empire game, they have all legal rights to all loot and all treasure that has ever been inside their territory. So any tomb that has any sword, it doesn't matter if it's from 2,000 years ago, they claim ownership of it. If you loot it from that tomb, the Dragon Empire owns the loot, and you get a 5% finder's fee, which is tyranny, right? It's horrible and no one supports it, but it means you can't just walk around in your fancy armor and your fancy sword all the time, because they'll be like, wait a minute, that's Dragon Empire stuff. Like, where'd you get that? Well, I found it in an old tomb. Yeah, that belongs to the Dragon Empire, right? So that added a fun kind of angle to it. So there are ways to kind of take the idea of whether or not adventuring groups should or should not have this loot and weave it back into the story. So it's not just a question of like, hey, this feels like a strange allegory to cultural appropriation and to colonialization. Think about what it means in the story of the game that you're actually playing. But if you want a couple of ways, just simple ways, there's just simple ways to kind of avoid having it be an issue anyway. One is that the spirits of whatever area you are going into, they want you to have it. They tell you they want you to have it, right? You have spirits that literally say, take this sword and go fight evil. I give you my permission. That's an easy one. Another one is like premonitions that that it is your duty. The gods are telling you to do this. Like when Perseus went over and found the sword, I'm going from Clash of the Titans. I don't know what the actual one was. I mean, there wasn't an actual one. It's all myth anyway. When he went and saw a sword, he didn't go like, oh, I wonder if that sword belongs to somebody else. He's like, no, the gods told you it's your sword, right? The shield said, guard well this shield, right? Pick it up. The gods said it's okay. So proclamation is also another way of use of you have the rights to do this. So it's an important conversation to have with your players. The other thing that you can consider doing, particularly like in this case, you had your players say, I don't know if we should take it. You can say like, let's pause for a minute and let's talk about it. And as a group, you can decide like, who are our characters and how do they feel about it? And how does the society feel about it? It's okay. Because in the end, it's all imaginary stuff, right? We're not talking about doing real things. We're talking about sitting and playing a game at our table. Nobody's actually looting stuff. But it can matter when you're role-playing your characters and your characters have feelings about what's there and they want to do what's right. And you can talk about what it means in the game itself and in the world of the game itself and with the characters, and they can kind of make that decision. You want to make sure your players are all okay with it, right? That's why it's like a good topic to have during a session 0, or you can pause at any point during the game, at any point during your campaign, and pause and say, hey, as players, how do we feel about this? Are we good? Let's think about what it means for characters, but let's also make sure as players, we're all comfortable that this is what our characters can do. And if they're good, then they're good. If they're all good as players, like, yeah, that totally seems fine, then you're good. If it's loot everything, like, hey, we're not the British Empire, we can go ahead and loot tombs, right? That's okay. If it's like, hey, some are better than others, that's okay, right? Some we're going to leave be unless we know that we have some kind of right to this thing or some kind of need to have this thing that outweighs the fact that we're disturbing an old one. That can work too. So good conversation to have, lots of different ways that you can address it. Hopefully I have given you some ideas for how to handle something like that. Richard K. says, our LGBT community board gaming group started a monthly D&D one-shot table a year ago, and I volunteered as a rotational GM. Given our 2-hour evening includes arrival and clear up, we have only 90 minutes of actual gameplay. I've typically run 1st to 3rd level adventures for 3 to 4 players using pre-generated characters to save time. I also drop players in media res after a quick objective and character intro, and I buddy up new players with experienced ones. My challenge is structuring a 90-minute one-shot. I'm finding it difficult to fit a strong start, an adaptable middle that can be pruned as needed, and a climactic finale, often combat, while also allowing time for a satisfying conclusion. Do you have any advice on how to effectively design and pace a D&D one-shot to fit within a strict 90-minute time frame, especially concerning the balance of introduction, a prunable middle, and impactful climax? Running a session in 50% of the usual time frame is difficult. So, Richard, it sounds like you have a good handle on all of the best things that I would offer. The idea of, that idea of having 3 to 4 players is great, right? And I recommend keeping a fewer number of players is better. 1st to 3rd level is also really good, right? I think you could probably go up to 4th level before things are going to get really bananas. The minute you hit 5th level, the character options, you have multiple attacks, you have a lot of other stuff going on. I think that can definitely be harder. So shorter, lower level, fewer number of players are the 2 biggest things you can do to kind of speed things up. There's really, when you're talking about the kind of model that makes for a good, engaging adventure, it's tough to have a lot of flexibility in what that adventure is going to look like when you need to hit that model and hit all of those fun beats in 90 minutes. You need an introduction, you need something to happen in the middle, and you need a conclusion, and you need a little downbeat, and that's it, right? Like you 4 scenes in 90 minutes, right? that's not a lot of time. Like that, I would consider that to be 2 to 3 scenes, right? Depending on what you're doing, is like 2 to 3 scenes. 4 scenes is tough. An intro, a middle, a conclusion, and then an aftermath, right? That's going to be pretty tight. There's probably a lot of different things you can do in there. I mean, so one is like, if you're going to have dungeons, keep them really small. 3 room mini dungeons, right? If you're going to have locational stuff, but then that's going to be tight. One way to kind of think about it is each one really is sort of its own big scene, right? That you're really talking about like one big scene and that flows together into one thing. Instead of kind of trying to think of it as a bunch of smaller scenes, try to think about it as one big circumstance. You can have like your strong start also be like the beginning of wherever they're going. Like you said in media res, skip the quest part. Skip them getting the quest. They already have the quests, right? Like your goal is to head into the goblin caves of the Caves of Chaos. So-and-so at the Keep of the Borderlands told you to go there. And now you find yourself at the cave entrance and you're beginning to think you're being watched, right? And you kind of jump past the quest giving side and jump straight into like the location that you're going to go and what's the first thing that's going to draw them there. But 90 minutes is tough, right? The only other thing is maybe, and I'm going to be like, you're playing the wrong system, but maybe one is to kind of say like, hey, let's try a lighter weight system like Shadowdark, right? You can get more done with a game like Shadowdark where all of the stuff is even more lightweight. 1st to 3rd level D&D is still not crazy, so I don't know if you're going to save a lot of time, but you might save some. And the threat levels that you're able to kind of put on characters in Shadowdark in a short amount of time, I think you might be able to squeeze in a little bit more if you pick a system that gives you a little bit more time. But honestly, it's tough. It's a tough situation, and I think so far, you've got experience in it. You've been doing it, so you might even have better ideas than I have for it. But if one thing I can kind of offer is I think you've got your hands around the problem pretty well, and I think already 2 of the things you're doing are the 2 biggest things I would recommend, which is low level, fewer players. And those are the biggest ways to kind of speed things up in all of your games. Friends, I want to thank you all for hanging out with me today while we talked about all things in tabletop role-playing games. If you enjoyed today's show, please consider subscribing to the Sly Flourish newsletter. You can find a link down in the show notes below. Each newsletter comes every Tuesday. You get a new RPG-related article with a bunch of links to all of the other work that I do. You also get a free Adventure Generator PDF for signing up, and it is absolutely free to sign up. You can also join the Sly Flourish Patreon. Patrons get access to all kinds of tips, tricks, tools, adventures, scenarios, a whole dedicated podcast, a whole separate podcast called Readings and Reflections, and our awesome Lazy DM community over on Discord. And you can pick up any of my books, including Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, The Lazy DM's Companion, City of Arches, Forge of Foes, and more at the Sly Flourish bookstore. Links are down in the show notes. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Get out there and play an RPG.